I can't stand beef. Can't eat it, can't even look at it sometimes. It's not some kind of moral stand, and I'm not religious. It's just the memories and history I have with it. I just can't. It's too much. Every year my dad used to hold a Thanksgiving barbecue. He'd grill up some burgers, some kebabs, maybe some sweet corn, and we'd have a feast. The last Thanksgiving barbecue we ever had was when I was 16. The last time I saw my dad breathing was 3 weeks after that. That year, he decided he wanted to try fresh beef mince. No one had noticed the meat was oddly moist and squishy, an off pink that wasn't quite right. We hadn't realized that there were worms in it until my dad had already cooked it. There's one thing you have to understand about my dad. I loved him to death, but he could be a bit of a stubborn idiot. That year, he decided he wanted to try fresh beef mince. No one had noticed the meat was oddly moist and squishy, an off pink that wasn't quite right. We hadn't realized that there were worms in it until my dad had already cooked it. There's one thing you have to understand about my dad. I loved him to death, but he could be a bit of a stubborn idiot, to the point of risking his life, jackass style. He'd grill the patties, toasted the buns, made his special sauce. He was going to eat his goddamn burger, worms or no worms. We all cringed and laughed as he devoured it in just a few bites, the sloppy pink juices running thick down his chin. In hindsight, we should have stopped him. In a way, we were all complicit in his death. Nothing happened for 2 days, but on the Sunday after Thanksgiving, during the church service, he shat himself on the pews. I know it sounds funny and all, but it was horrifying. It was all pale and streaked with blood, and when I looked real close, I could see small chunks of rancid flesh swarmed by the tiny pink bodies of worms. They wiggled around, tiny holes opening in the front of their bulbous, soft heads to reveal rows of tiny teeth. I vomited. He was bedridden that afternoon. It seemed he wouldn't stop shitting, each time getting bloodier and bloodier. The bodies of hundreds, no, thousands of worms contorting in the toilet bowl. There were moments of lucidity when he'd hold my hand and ask for me to get help, but he spent most of the day feverish and sick. The doctor couldn't visit until the next business day. The whole night I sat next to him, watching as he moaned and sobbed, his face racked with pain. My hand was damp with his sweat, spit, and tears by the next morning, when the doctor finally came. And asked for me to get help, but he spent most of the day feverish and sick. The doctor couldn't visit until the next business day. The whole night I sat next to him, watching as he moaned and sobbed, his face racked with pain. My hand was damp with his sweat, spit, and tears by the next morning when the doctor finally came. Mom was having a breakdown in her bedroom as the doctor explained to me that he had no idea what this was or how to treat it. Dad would have to go to the hospital. I gasped with relief at this. I couldn't bear the thought of him wasting away at home. But then my dad raised a shaking hand. No hospital. I want to be at home, he moaned weakly. The doctor looked at me sadly, his eyes filled with some faint regret. There's nothing I can do, son. I'll visit you when I have some answers, okay? Tell your ma to call me with any questions. And just like that, The bastard was gone, and my dad was still dying, and Mom was losing her mind in the back of the house, and oh God, what was I going to do? For 2 weeks, I cleaned him and fed him and held his hand while he groaned in pain. For 2 weeks, I had to listen to his moans and screams while I laid in bed, the sound piercing my thoughts and my dreams. On the third Thursday after Thanksgiving, the worms appeared on his chest. They were fat little bumps in his skin, flexing and writhing, stretching his skin taut with a million tiny pink flecks. And as they dug their way up towards his face, they left thick, bloody trails in the raw exposed flesh, tunnels carved into his body. He woke less and less these days, but when he did, he felt every detail of their mincing jaws. Richard, what is that on my chest? It feels so weird. Nothing, Dad. It's nothing. Just don't worry about any of it. You'll be fine. The doctors are coming soon. Love. He drifted back into blissful sleep, unaware that he was being eaten alive. But I couldn't lie to myself. I'd seen them crawl through him, the thin film of his skin warping to fit around their swollen bodies. The next day, they doubled in size. I couldn't do it. I couldn't watch these finger-sized monsters eat my dad alive. Already his chest was swollen and purple, bursting to full with blood and loose meat. And now they were crawling up to his neck, into his face where they'd chew on his cheeks and gnaw on his eyeball until it popped like some sick blister. I had to stop them. I had to cut them out. I had to save my dad. I grabbed an X-Acto knife from my room, tracing it delicately around one of the protrusions in his neck. I started to uncover a wriggling flesh, pink mass. It wasn't one worm in the lump. It was hundreds, their tiny bodies spilling from the slit in his neck, dribbling onto the floor, onto my arm, slimy and slippery and tinged crimson with Dad's blood. I desperately scraped them off of my arm, scrubbing and shrieking. Soon, more than just worms were dripping from the gaping hole. Blood. It started to drip faster and faster until it was pouring onto the floor. A crimson torrent carrying with it hundreds of the tiny things. I scrambled back, away from my dad's body, and suddenly my head swelled from the pain and shock, and everything went black. They found me comatose next to his corpse, his throat slit, a bloody knife in my hand. There really wasn't a case to make, just a news story. Local boy kills sick father. We managed to argue ethical reasons, pretended it was euthanasia. I only got a reduced manslaughter sentence. I still lost the rest of my teenage years and a decent chunk of my adult life in prison. I'm out now, but that event stuck with me ever since. To this day, I can't look at a piece of beef and not imagine worms writhing in the raw flesh.